The girl had no name worth remembering. Some called her Mary, others Sarah, but mostly they called her nothing at all. She was 15 winters old, maybe 16. She'd lost count somewhere between Kansas and the Colorado Territory, somewhere between the last meal and the endless walking. The autumn of 1871 found her drifting through the mining camps and frontier settlements like tumbleweed, blown by winds of circumstance rather than choice. Her dress, once blue calico, had faded to the color of dust and hung loose on her thin frame. The hem was torn in 3 places, each tear marking a different town where dogs had chased her from back porches, where women clutched their children closer at the sight of her matted auburn hair. In Silver Creek, she'd slept behind the livery stable for 2 nights before the hostler found her. He'd thrown a bucket of water at her like she was a stray cat. The water was cold enough to make her teeth chatter for hours afterward. But she'd been grateful for it. In a way, it was the closest thing to a bath she'd had in weeks. She learned to move at dusk and dawn, when the light was kind enough to soften the sharp bones of her face, when decent folk were either ending their day or beginning it, too busy to notice one more shadow slipping between buildings. Her stomach had long since stopped its violent protests, settling into a dull, constant ache that she carried like a stone beneath her ribs. The settlements were scattered across the territory like coins tossed by a careless hand. Each one promised nothing and delivered less. In harmony, she'd tried to wash dishes at the boarding house for a meal, but the proprietress, Mrs. Garrett, had taken one look at her and declared she wouldn't have that kind near her establishment. What kind that was, the girl never learned, though she could guess. Orphans carried a particular smell not just of dirt and hunger, but of bad luck itself. She'd buried her parents 3 years back, or was it 4? Time moved strangely when you had no home to mark it by. The fever had taken them within days of each other, leaving her with a wagon she couldn't drive, oxen she couldn't manage, and dreams of California that crumbled like old bread. She'd sold what she could, abandoned what she couldn't, and started walking. At first, she'd tried to find work. She could read and write, her mother had seen to that, back when there was lamplight and books and evening prayers. But reading didn't fill bellies, and her soft hands blistered too easily for field work. The traveling preacher in Bent's Fort had promised to help her find a position with a good Christian family, but his help had come with hands that wandered and breath that stank of whiskey. She'd run that night, leaving behind her mother's Bible, the last thing of value she'd owned. Now she survived on what she could find, what she could steal when desperation overcame shame. Apple cores tossed from wagon beds, heel ends of bread forgotten on back steps. Once, gloriously, a whole pie cooling on a windowsill, though the guilt of taking it had twisted her stomach worse than hunger. The nights were the hardest. When darkness fell across the prairie, the world became a vast and terrible thing. She'd huddle beneath whatever shelter she could find, a jutting rock, a thick stand of sage, the ruins of an abandoned soddy. The coyotes sang their ancient songs, and sometimes she wondered if they were calling to her, recognizing her as another creature living on the margins between wild and civilized. In the small hours, when the cold cut deepest, she'd remember her mother's hands braiding her hair, her father's voice reading from the almanac. She'd remember the weight of her baby brother in her arms before the croup took him, how his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers with such trust. These memories were dangerous luxuries. They made her weak when she needed to be hard, made her cry when she couldn't afford the loss of water. She learned the brutal mathematics of survival. Pride cost more than she could pay. Dignity was a luxury reserved for those with full bellies and warm beds. She learned to lower her eyes, to make herself small and unremarkable. She learned which back doors might yield scraps and which would yield only curses or worse. The widow Thompson in Cedar Ridge had given her work for a week, washing laundry until her hands cracked and bled. But when supplies went missing from the pantry, though the girl hadn't taken them, suspicion naturally fell on the orphan. She'd left with the widow's accusations following her like thunder. Some nights, curled beneath the vast western sky. She wondered if dying might be easier. She'd seen death enough to know it wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it came gentle as sleep, a soft exhale between one breath and none. But something stubborn in her refused to yield. Maybe it was her mother's blood Irish stock, her father had always said with pride. Tough as leather and twice as enduring. Or maybe it was simply that she was too angry to die, too filled with a rage that had no target except the endless horizon. The land itself seemed hostile to her existence. The sun burned her fair skin until it peeled in sheets. The wind chapped her lips until they bled. Her monthly bleeding had stopped from hunger. She supposed, which was both a relief and a worry she didn't fully understand. Her body was becoming something else, something harder and more elemental, shaped by necessity rather than nature. She avoided the Indian territories when she could, though she feared white settlements nearly as much. She'd heard stories of what the Apache did to white women, but she'd experienced firsthand what white men did to orphan girls. Evil. She'd learned, wore many faces and spoke many languages. As October faded toward November, the cold began to settle into the land like an unwelcome guest planning to stay. She needed shelter, real shelter, before the snows came. But every town was the same suspicious faces, closed doors, the constant reminder that she belonged nowhere and to no one. Standing at the edge of yet another settlement, this one called Fortune's End. Though she saw little fortune and suspected the end might be hers, she watched the good people go about their evening routines. Children called to supper, men heading home from the mines, their faces black with dust but their purpose clear. Women gathering laundry from lines, their movements efficient and certain. She had become a ghost haunting the edges of their world, neither fully alive nor mercifully dead. The realization struck her as she stood there. Swaying slightly from exhaustion and hunger, she was disappearing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, inevitably, like words fading from a page left too long in the sun. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled long and mournful, a sound that seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world. She listened to it fade, then turned away from Fortune's End without entering. Tomorrow she would try again. Tomorrow she would search for work, for food, for the simple acknowledgement that she existed. But tonight, she would find a place to hide from the coming cold, to wrap the tatters of her dress around her body and pretend, for just a few hours, that somewhere in this vast and pitiless land, there might be a place where she belonged. She didn't know, couldn't know, that fate was already riding toward her on Apache ponies, that her story of solitude was about to end and another, stranger tale would soon begin. For now, there was only the gathering darkness, the distant howl of predators, and the stubborn beat of her heart that refused, despite everything, to stop. The afternoon sun hung low and angry in the sky, casting long shadows through the scattered pines. She had wandered far from Fortune's End, following a creek that promised water but delivered only mud and disappointment. Her hands were raw from digging beneath stones, searching for the trickle that must exist somewhere beneath the dry bed. She didn't hear them coming. The Apache moved through the landscape like smoke, part of it rather than upon it. One moment she was alone with her thirst and exhaustion. The next, she was surrounded by 5 mounted warriors, their faces painted with designs that meant nothing to her but death. Her body forgot its weakness. She bolted like a spooked deer, but there was nowhere to run. The horses cut off every escape, their riders silent as nightmares. She stumbled, fell, scrambled up again, her breath coming in gasps that hurt her chest, when she finally collapsed. It was less from exhaustion than from the simple recognition that running was pointless. They spoke among themselves in a language that sounded like wind and stone. She kept her eyes down, having learned that direct gazes invited violence. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the earth, feeling the small rocks cut into her palms. She waited for the arrow, the knife, whatever end they chose for her. Instead, she heard one of them dismount. Moccasined feet appeared in her limited vision, decorated with beadwork that must have taken someone hours of careful labor. The feet stood there, patient as mountains, until finally she had to look up. The man studying her was perhaps 30 winters, though it was hard to tell. His face bore the marks of a life lived hard. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, pale against his sun-darkened skin. But it was his eyes that held her. They were black as obsidian, but not cold. There was something else there, a weight of seeing that made her feel both exposed and oddly recognized. He said something in Apache. When she didn't respond, he tried Spanish, then broken English. "You alone?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Family?" She shook her head. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her sunburned skin, the particular gauntness that spoke of prolonged hunger. Then he turned to the others and spoke rapidly. An argument erupted. She didn't need to understand the words to recognize the tone. Two of the warriors gestured sharply at her, their meaning clear. Kill her. Leave her. She was nothing but trouble. But the scarred man's voice carried a different weight. He spoke with the measured cadence of someone used to being heard. The others responded, but gradually their protests weakened. Whatever authority he carried, it was enough to turn the tide of their opinion. He looked back at her and spoke a single word: stand. She tried. Her legs betrayed her halfway up, muscles cramped from running and days of poor food. She expected mockery, but the warrior simply waited while she gathered herself and tried again. This time, she managed it, swaying slightly but upright. He pointed to his horse. The animal was smaller than the cavalry mounts she'd seen, but its eyes held an intelligence that made her nervous. When she didn't move, the warrior didn't repeat the gesture, didn't threaten. He simply waited with a patience that seemed infinite. She understood then. This was a choice, perhaps the last one she'd ever make. She could refuse, and they would likely leave her here to continue her slow dissolution into the landscape. Or she could climb onto that horse and accept whatever fate awaited her among people who had every reason to hate her kind. The other warriors watched, their painted faces unreadable. The sun continued its descent, painting everything in shades of red that looked too much like blood. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, the sound sharp and final. She took a step toward the horse, then another. The warrior moved aside, neither helping nor hindering. With trembling hands, she grasped the horse's mane and tried to pull herself up. It took 3 attempts. On the third, just as her strength was failing, she felt hands at her waist, lifting her with surprising gentleness onto the horse's back. The warrior swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His chest was solid against her back. His arms came around her to take the reins. He smelled of sage smoke, leather, and something else wild but not unpleasant. She had been close to men before, always with fear. This was different. There was no threat in his proximity, only a practical arrangement of shared transportation. They rode in silence as the sun died. The other warriors flanked them, watchful but no longer openly hostile. She noticed things in her exhausted state, how they moved as one organism, how they read the land like a book written in stone and shadow. They were taking her northwest, away from the settlements, toward mountains that looked blue in the fading light. As full darkness approached, they stopped at a place that seemed no different from any other to her eyes, but which the warriors had chosen with obvious purpose. A small spring bubbled from between rocks, hidden by an overhang that would shelter them from view. They dismounted with practiced efficiency, and she slid gracelessly from the horse, her legs barely holding her. The scarred warrior pointed to a spot near the spring. "Sit." She sat. The warriors made camp with minimal fuss, no fire, just dried meat and water from the spring. One of them tossed her a strip of jerky. It was tougher than leather and tasted of smoke and salt, but her mouth flooded with saliva at the first bite. She forced herself to chew slowly. having learned the hard way what happened when a starved stomach received too much too fast. The scarred warrior watched her eat. When she finished the strip, he handed her another, along with a handful of pine nuts. The other warriors observed this with expressions ranging from disapproval to curiosity. One, younger than the rest, with geometric patterns painted across his cheeks, said something that sounded like a question. The scarred warrior responded with a name, Taza. It took her a moment to realize he was indicating himself. Taza. The word sat strangely on her tongue. Foreign but solid. He pointed at her, eyebrows raised in question. "Mary?" she whispered, though the name felt like a lie. She'd been Sarah in the last town, Rebecca in the one before. Names were just sounds people made to indicate which particular misery they meant. "Mary," he repeated, the syllables different in his mouth, rounder somehow. Then he pointed to the younger warrior, Nayeli, to another Kuruk. Each name was given simply, without ceremony. But she sensed this was significant. Names had power here in ways they didn't in the settlements where she'd been nobody. As the night deepened, the warriors rolled themselves in blankets and appeared to sleep, though she suspected at least one remained watchful. Taza gestured for her to lie near the spring, then surprised her by laying a blanket over her, not his own, but an extra from his horse's pack. The wool was rough but warm, carrying the same sage smoke scent as its owner. She lay there, staring up at stars that seemed both ancient and immediate. Her body ached in a dozen places. Her future was uncertain as morning fog, and she was surrounded by Apache warriors who might decide come dawn that bringing her had been a mistake. Yet, for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something that wasn't quite safety, but wasn't quite fear either. Tomorrow they would reach wherever they were going. Tomorrow she would learn what Taza intended by saving her from one fate only to deliver her to another. But tonight, with a full belly and a blanket against the cold, she allowed herself the dangerous luxury of something almost like hope. The last thing she saw before exhaustion claimed her was Taza sitting cross-legged at the camp's edge, his scarred profile outlined against the stars. He wasn't watching her, wasn't watching anything in particular. He simply sat, patient as stone, while the night turned around them and the future rushed toward them on silent feet. In her dreams, she was running again. But this time she wasn't sure if she was running from something or toward it. The distinction, she was beginning to understand, might matter less than she'd thought. The Apache camp appeared suddenly, as if the earth had chosen to reveal it only when they were nearly upon it. Wickiups dotted the valley floor like enormous baskets turned upside down, their frameworks covered with bear grass and canvas. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of daily life, children laughing, dogs barking. The rhythmic thud of grinding stones filled the air with a vitality that made her chest tight with unnamed longing. Their arrival caused a stir. Women looked up from their work. Children ran alongside the horses, and warriors emerged from various dwellings to see what Taza had brought home. The looks directed at her ranged from curiosity to open hostility. She kept her eyes down, gripping the horse's mane until her knuckles went white. Taza dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs buckled, but his hand on her elbow kept her upright until she found her balance. He spoke to the gathering crowd in Apache, his tone calm but firm. She caught her name, or the name she'd given him, Mary, sounding foreign and small in the midst of their flowing language. An older woman pushed through the crowd, her gray hair twisted into an elaborate knot, her dress decorated with elk teeth that clicked softly as she moved. She circled Mary like a buyer inspecting doubtful goods, her dark eyes missing nothing. She spoke to Taza, her tone sharp with questions. He responded patiently, but the woman's frown only deepened. Finally, the woman reached out and pinched Mary's arm, testing the muscle that wasn't there. She made a disgusted sound and said something that made several onlookers laugh. Then she turned and walked away, clearly washing her hands of the situation. Taza led Mary to a wickiup set slightly apart from the others. Inside, it was dim and smoky, but warmer than anywhere she'd slept in months. Buffalo robes covered the floor, and various implements hung from the wooden framework baskets. Water gourds, items she couldn't identify. He pointed to a corner where some worn blankets were folded. "You here," he said in his broken English. Then he left. She sat in the indicated corner, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. Through the wickiup's entrance, she could see the camp returning to its rhythms, though she caught many glances thrown her way. Children peered around the doorway until their mothers called them back with sharp words. As the day wore on, her isolation became complete. No one entered the wickiup. No one brought food or water. She could hear life continuing outside, women talking as they worked, the sound of meat being prepared, children playing some game that involved much shrieking and laughter. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she didn't dare venture out. Near sunset, a girl appeared in the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 12 winters, with a round face and curious eyes. She set down a wooden bowl and a water gourd, then fled before Mary could attempt any thanks. The bowl contained a thin stew of some kind of meat and wild onions. Mary ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that she didn't know when the next meal might come. That night, she lay on the blankets and listened to the camp settle into sleep. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. Dogs barked at something in the darkness, the familiar night sounds of any human settlement, yet utterly foreign in their context. The next days blurred together in a haze of confusion and growing hunger. The girl she learned her name was Ayana brought food irregularly, sometimes a full bowl, sometimes barely a handful of parched corn. Mary tried to communicate her thanks, but Ayana always darted away like a frightened rabbit. She attempted to leave the wickiup, to perhaps find water herself or show she could be useful, but the women outside made their displeasure clear. They didn't touch her, but their looks and gestures left no doubt she was to stay where Taza had put her, like a dog told to hold. The language barrier was absolute. She tried to pick up words, listening carefully to the conversations around her, but the sounds seemed to slip away from her understanding like water through cupped hands. The women spoke rapidly when she was near, their tones making it clear she was often the subject of discussion. On the fourth day, Taza finally returned. He'd been away from the camp hunting, she assumed. Though he carried no game, he found her sitting exactly where he'd left her, though considerably dirtier and more desperate. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke sharply to someone outside. Ayana appeared with a full meal roasted meat, some kind of flatbread, and pine nut mush. Mary ate under his watchful gaze, trying not to wolf it down like the starving creature she was. "You work," he said when she finished. "No work, no eat." She nodded eagerly. Work she understood, work she could do. But the women wanted no part of her. When she tried to help with grinding corn, they shooed her away. When she attempted to gather firewood with a group heading out, they walked faster until she couldn't keep up. Every task she approached, she was rejected from, sometimes gently, often not. She retreated to the wickiup, frustration and hunger making her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. Taza appeared again at evening, took in the situation with a glance, and made a sound of disgust. He spoke at length with an older woman who seemed to hold some authority. Their conversation grew heated, with much gesturing in Mary's direction. Finally, the woman threw up her hands and stalked away. Taza entered the wickiup and sat across from Mary. In the dim light, his scarred face was hard to read. "Tomorrow, you learn," he said. "Learn Apache way. Learn or—" He didn't finish, but she understood. Learn or leave, learn or starve, learn or die. The choices were all variations of the same theme. "I'll learn," she whispered. He nodded once, then left. But a short while later, Ayana appeared with not just food but also a comb made of porcupine quills. a cake of soap that smelled of yucca root, and a dress of soft deerskin. The girl set these down carefully, then surprised Mary by staying. "Taza says I teach," Ayanna said in careful English. "You listen, you learn." Mary nodded, hope fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. Ayanna pointed to herself. "Shinai." Then to Mary, "Inda." "Shinai," Mary repeated. The word felt clumsy in her mouth. "No." Ayanna shook her head. She repeated the word slowly, showing how her tongue moved, where it touched her teeth. Mary tried again and again. Finally, she produced something that made Ayanna nod with satisfaction. They continued until full darkness. Basic words watertu, firku, eat iya. Each word was a small victory, a tiny bridge across the chasm of incomprehension. When Ayanna finally left, Mary lay back on her blankets, mentally reviewing each new sound. The next morning, she washed with the yucca soap at the stream, under the watchful eyes of several women who seemed to be waiting for her to do something wrong. She changed into the deerskin dress, which felt strange against her skin, but infinitely better than her tattered calico. When she returned to the camp, a few of the women nodded approval at her appearance. Ayanna appeared and led her to where women were processing deer hides. They watched with skeptical eyes as Mary was shown how to scrape the hide with a piece of flint. Her first attempts were clumsy. She pressed too hard, tearing the hide, then too soft, leaving tissue behind. The women clicked their tongues in disapproval, but one, younger than the rest with kind eyes, showed her again with patient hands. By midday, her arms ached and her hands were blistered, but she'd managed to clean a small section without ruining it. The kind-eyed woman Ayanna whispered her name was Ipa gave her an approving pat on the shoulder. Days passed in this manner. Each dawn brought new lessons, new failures, small victories. She learned to grind corn without spilling half of it, to identify which plants could be eaten and which would cause sickness, to build a fire that would last through the night. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger. The deerskin dress began to feel natural against her skin. But more than skills, she was learning to see, to notice how the women moved through their tasks with an efficiency born of generations of practice, how they could tell by the sky whether rain would come, how they knew which roots to dig in which season, how to make a dozen different things from a single plant. Taza remained a distant figure, watching her progress but rarely interacting. Sometimes she caught his gaze across the camp, those dark eyes unreadable as deep water. He never smiled, but occasionally she thought she saw approval in the set of his shoulders when she mastered some new task. The hostility from the other women began to fade, replaced by a cautious acceptance. She was still Indea White, still an outsider, but she was trying. That seemed to count for something. One evening, as she helped Ipa prepare a stew of rabbit and wild potatoes, the woman spoke to her in slow, careful Apache. Mary understood perhaps half the words, but the meaning was clear. Tomorrow there would be a gathering, a celebration of some kind. Mary should help prepare. That night, as she lay on her increasingly familiar blankets, she realized with a start that she'd stopped counting the days since her arrival. The life she'd known before the endless walking, the hunger, the crushing loneliness felt like something that had happened to another person in another lifetime. She was still an orphan, still a stranger in a strange land, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had a place to sleep, food to eat, and work to do. It wasn't home. She didn't know if anywhere would ever be that again, but it was something. Outside, she could hear the camp preparing for tomorrow's celebration. Women sang as they worked, their voices rising and falling in harmonies that made her chest ache with their beauty. She didn't know the words, but she hummed along under her breath, adding her small sound to theirs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, but tonight she was simply Mary who was learning to be Ndee, and that was enough. The full moon hung like a silver dollar in the cloudless sky, casting shadows sharp enough to cut. The celebration had ended hours ago. leaving behind the lingering smells of roasted venison and pine smoke. Mary sat outside the wickiup, too restless to sleep, watching the camp settle into quiet. She heard him before she saw him. Taza moved with deliberate steps, allowing her to know of his approach. He stopped a respectful distance away, his face half in shadow, half in moonlight. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Walk," he said finally, gesturing toward the edge of camp. She rose without hesitation. 3 months among the Apache had taught her that when Taza spoke, it mattered. They walked in silence past the last wickiup, past the dogs that lifted their heads but didn't bark, knowing his scent. He led her to a flat rock overlooking the valley, where the land spread out before them like a sleeping giant. He sat, and she settled nearby, careful to maintain proper distance. The night air was cold, making her pull the blankets she'd brought tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, the sound lonely and wild. "You learn good," he said at last. "Apache way hard. You not give up." She nodded, unsure if response was needed. These past months had been the hardest of her life, yet somehow also the most grounded. Each day had purpose, structure, meaning beyond mere survival. "I need woman," he continued, his voice careful, measuring each word. "Woman for my house, woman for my children. My first woman died 2 winters past. Sickness take her, take our son." Mary's breath caught. She'd known Taza was alone, had wondered why a man of his standing had no wife. Now she understood the weight she'd sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. "Apache women good, strong, but I choose different." He turned to look at her directly. "I choose you." The words hung between them like suspended stars. Mary's mind raced, trying to grasp what he was saying. Among the Apache, she'd learned, marriage was a practical matter as much as an emotional one, a merger of work and purpose, of bloodlines and futures. "You take my name," he continued. "Bear my children. Your sons be Apache warriors. Your daughters be Apache women. No more Indaya. No more alone." She found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Why me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, something deeper and more personal. "I watch you by the dry creek. See you ready to die but still fighting, like wounded wolf hurt but not broken. I think this one has strong spirit. This one will make strong children." He shifted, pulling something from his pouch. In the moonlight, she saw it was a string of turquoise beads, polished smooth by years of handling. "My grandmother's," he said, "and her grandmother's before. Worth 20 horses, maybe more. You take, you be Apache, you be mine. You refuse," he shrugged. "You free, I take you back to white settlements. No shame." Mary stared at the beads, understanding the weight of what he offered. Not just marriage, but identity. Not just a home, but a people. The girl who had been nobody would become somebody Taza's wife, mother of his children, keeper of his grandmother's beads. But at what cost? She thought of her parents, their dreams of California, of good Christian lives in a land of plenty. What would they think of their daughter now, dressed in deerskin, speaking Apache, considering marriage to a man they would have called savage? "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Fear make you careful. Careful keep you alive." "The others, they barely accept me now, as your wife." "As my wife, they accept or answer to me." His tone carried the quiet authority she'd observed these past months. Taza was not chief, but he was respected, his word carrying weight in council. "I don't know your ways of marriage, of being a wife." "You learn, same as you learn everything else." She looked at his profile in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the scar that spoke of survival, the patient eyes that had seen her worth when she'd had none left to see in herself. He was not a gentleman, but he was a fair one. She'd watched him with others, seen his justice, his protection of those under his care. "What if I can't give you children?" The words tumbled out, born of a fear she hadn't even known she carried. Her monthly bleeding had returned with proper food, but who knew what damage the starving time had done? "Then we grow old with empty arms," he said simply. "Skyfather decides, not us." The owl called again. Closer now. Mary pulled the blanket tighter, her mind churning. She thought of the settlements, of the closed doors and suspicious faces, of sleeping rough and running from dogs and men alike. That life waited for her still if she refused. Taza would keep his word. She knew. He would take her back, leave her at some town's edge, and ride away. But here she had learned to tan hides until they were soft as cloth, to find water in dry country, to read weather in cloud patterns, to laugh with Ayana over shared jokes in a language that no longer sounded foreign, to sit with Ipa and the other women, hands busy with work, belonging to the circle even if she stood at its edge. "Would I still be Mary?" she asked. "You be who you choose. Apache name's earned, not given. Maybe you earn new name. Maybe you keep old. Your choice." Your choice. When had anyone last offered her choices that mattered? She looked at the beads again, seeing in them not just turquoise, but generations of women who had worn them, who had borne children and buried them, who had known joy and sorrow, and the turning of seasons. Could she join that line? Did she have the right? "I need time to think." He nodded and rose to his feet. 3 days. Then you choose." He started to walk away, then paused. "Mary." She looked up at him. "White world throw you away like broken pot. Apache world harder. But we don't waste strength. You have strength. I see it. Others see it too, even if they don't say." He left her there with the beads in her lap, and the night spreading endlessly around her. She sat until the cold drove her back to the wickiup, where she lay wakeful until dawn. The turquoise string wound around her fingers like a question she didn't yet know how to answer. The next days passed in a strange suspension. Word had spread somehow, word always spread in the camp, and the women watched her with new interest, some with speculation, others with resentment, a few, like Ipa, with something that might have been encouragement. She went about her daily tasks, but her mind was elsewhere. While grinding corn, she thought of Taza's hands, scarred from war but gentle when he'd lifted her onto his horse, while gathering wood. She remembered his patience as the camp slowly accepted her presence, while mending a basket. She considered what it would mean to be wife to a warrior, mother to children who would grow up calling this harsh land home. On the second night, Ayana came to sit with her. The girl had become dear to her, a bridge between worlds with her careful English and patient teaching. "You afraid?" Ayana asked. "Yes." "Good. Taza good man. Hard man, but good. He keep you safe. Teach sons to be strong. Teach daughters to be proud." "Do you think I could do it, be a proper Apache wife?" Ayana tilted her head, considering. "You learn our words, learn our work, learn our ways. But in here," she touched her chest. "Still in Daya. Question is, can you be both?" It was, Mary realized, exactly the right question. Not whether she could become Apache, but whether she could be both what she was and what she might become. Whether she could honor her past while embracing a future she never could have imagined. That night she dreamed of her mother, who smiled and said nothing, only handed her a bundle. When she woke, she couldn't remember what the bundle contained, but the feeling lingered not of blessing exactly, but of release, of permission to stop carrying the weight of who she was supposed to be. The third day dawned clear and cold. Mary went about her morning tasks with hands that barely trembled. As the sun reached its peak, she saw Taza watching her from across the camp. He didn't approach, didn't pressure. He simply waited, patient as the mountains themselves. As afternoon shadows grew long, she walked to where he sat working on a new bow. She held out the turquoise beads, and for a moment, his face went still. Then she spoke the words Ayana had taught her, careful with the pronunciation. Shinali Nili, I am your wife. Something shifted in his eyes' surprise, perhaps that she'd spoken in Apache, or maybe satisfaction that she'd taken the time to learn the proper words. He took the beads and stood, fastening them around her neck with steady hands. The turquoise was cool against her skin, heavier than she'd expected. Tonight we tell the camp, he said. Tomorrow we begin. She nodded, touching the beads at her throat. They felt strange there, foreign yet already precious, like everything in this new life earned through struggle, worn with growing pride, marking her as something she was still learning how to be. The announcement of their marriage brought mixed reactions. Some women embraced her with genuine warmth, while others kept their distance, their eyes hard with disapproval. But with the turquoise beads at her throat, a visible sign of Taza's claim and her acceptance, none dared voice their objections openly. Life in Taza's wickiup was different from her solitary existence. He was gone often hunting, raiding, meeting with other bands, but when present, he was a steady force. He spoke little but taught constantly, showing her which roots made the strongest rope, how to read weather in the flight patterns of birds, where to find water in seemingly dry country. The real test came with daily living. As Taza's wife, more was expected. She had to maintain their home, prepare his gear for raids, ensure guests were properly fed when warriors gathered to smoke and plan. The women watched her constantly, waiting for her to fail, to prove their doubts justified. One morning, 3 months into their marriage, she woke to find the camp in turmoil. During the night, the horse herd had scattered, spooked by a mountain cat. The boys guarding them said the loss was serious. Without horses, the band was vulnerable, unable to move quickly or hunt efficiently. The men prepared to track the animals, but a spring storm was building, promising to wash away any trail. They needed to move fast. Mary watched the preparations, then made a decision that surprised even her. She approached Taza as he readied his gear. I can help, she said in Apache, her fluency still imperfect but improving. I know horses. My father bred them, back before. He studied her. This is men's work. Horses don't care if men or women find them. They care about grain and gentle hands. She met his gaze steadily. Let me try. The other warriors objected, but Taza silenced them with a gesture. She rides with us. They found the horses scattered across several valleys, nervous and wild-eyed. The warriors' approach only agitated them further, but Mary dismounted, pulled a pouch of wild grain from her pack gathered weeks ago and saved for such purposes, and began the low, steady humming her father had used with spooked animals. One mare, braver or hungrier than the rest, approached cautiously. Mary didn't move, didn't reach out, simply continued humming and let the grain trickle from her hand. The mare lipped at it, and Mary slowly, carefully, looped a rope around her neck. Where one went, others followed. Within an hour, she had caught the lead mare and several others. The warriors, following her example with grain she distributed, managed to secure the rest. They returned to camp with the full herd as the first fat raindrops began to fall. That night, the story was told and retold around the fires. The white woman who sang horses home. Even those who had been coldest toward her nodded approval when she passed. She had proven her worth in a way that transcended blood or birth. But the greatest test came unexpectedly. Late summer brought drought, streams drying to trickles, game moving to higher country. The band struggled, children crying from half-filled bellies, tempers growing short. Then came word from scouts. A flash flood had roared down a distant canyon, trapping a group of women and children gathering pine nuts. The men rode out immediately to help, leaving the main camp nearly defenseless. That same night, as if sensing opportunity, a war party from an enemy tribe appeared on the ridge above camp. Not many, perhaps 8 or 10 warriors, but enough to cause havoc among the women, children, and elderly left behind. Mary was grinding acorns when the alarm cry went up. Women grabbed children, running for the thick brush where they might hide. But Mary looked around and saw what would happen scattered. Panicked, they would be easy prey. Something rose in her, fierce and unexpected. "No!" she shouted in Apache. "To the center, make circle!" Perhaps it was the authority in her voice, or the simple fact that someone was giving clear orders. The women responded, gathering in the camp's center. Children pushed to the middle. Anyone who could hold a weapon facing outward. Mary grabbed Taza's spare bow, one he'd been teaching her to use. Her hands shook as she notched an arrow, but her voice remained steady as she called out positions. Organized the defense. The elderly men, those too old for the rescue mission, took heart from her courage and joined the circle, their ancient weapons ready. The enemy warriors descended, expecting easy victory. Instead, they met organized resistance. Arrows flew from the defensive circle, most missing, but enough finding marks to slow the attack. Mary's arrow caught one warrior in the shoulder, spinning him around. An old grandmother's spear thrust caught another in the thigh. The battle was brief but fierce. 2 enemy warriors fell. Others were wounded, and faced with unexpected resistance, they retreated, carrying their injured and leaving behind only blood and a few scattered arrows. When Taza and the others returned near dawn, successful in their rescue, they found the camp in defensive position, the enemy driven off, and Mary at the center of it all, still holding his bow with bloody hands from where the string had cut her unpracticed fingers. The story spread like wildfire through not just their band, but others. The Indo woman who had become Apache enough to defend the people. That night, as Ipa tended her lacerated fingers, the old woman spoke. "I was wrong about you. I thought Taza foolish, taking white woman, but you have Apache heart, Apache spirit. You belong here." The acceptance was complete now, earned in blood and courage. But with acceptance came something else: expectation. She was no longer the outsider trying to fit in. She was Taza's wife, defender of the camp, horse singer. She had a place, a role, responsibilities beyond mere survival. Winter approached, and with it came the season of stories, of planning, of indoor work. Mary's Apache improved daily, and she found herself translating when Mexican traders came. Bridging worlds with growing confidence, her hands, once soft from her former life, were now strong and capable, marked with the scars of work and war. One night, as snow fell softly outside their wickiup, Taza spoke of the future. "Spring comes, we move south, meet other bands, trade, dance, maybe raid the Mexicans if they grow too bold." He paused, studying her. "You carry my children well through such travels." She understood what he was asking. Life among the Apache meant constant movement, following game and seasons. Children learned to ride before they walked, to endure hardship as naturally as breathing. "I'll carry them as Apache women do," she replied, strong, proud, teaching them the ways of both worlds they come from. He nodded, satisfied. "You are no longer Mary who was white. You need Apache name. I think on this." As winter deepened, she proved herself again and again. When sickness came to the camp, she remembered her mother's remedies and combined them with Apache medicine, helping heal several children the traditional cures hadn't helped. When food grew scarce, she showed the women how to prepare certain roots the Apache had considered inedible, doubling their winter stores. By the time spring's first warmth touched the land, her transformation was complete. The frightened, starving girl who had collapsed by a dry creek was gone. In her place stood a woman marked by confidence and capability, wearing her turquoise beads with the natural right of one who had earned her place through trial and triumph. The band prepared to move, to meet with others for the spring gathering. As Mary packed their household goods with practiced efficiency, she caught her reflection in the still water of a pot. The face looking back was leaner, marked by sun and weather, but the eyes held something they'd lacked before: purpose, belonging, home. Taza appeared beside her, holding a new quiver decorated with beadwork, a gift from the women to honor her defense of the camp. You ready? He asked. She touched the beads at her throat, thought of all she'd survived and overcome, of the children she would bear and the life she would build. Yes, she said in perfect Apache. I'm ready. The dust cloud appeared on the eastern horizon just after dawn, too large and moving too deliberately to be buffalo. Mary stood with the other women at the camp's edge, shading her eyes against the rising sun. Beside her, Ipa muttered darkly about white men and their endless hunger for Apache land. The scouts returned within the hour, confirming what everyone feared. A party of settlers, 20 men, well armed, with the look of those seeking to claim land or revenge for some real or imagined Apache crime. They were heading directly for the camp. Taza and the other warriors prepared for battle, but the numbers were troubling. Many of their best fighters were away, hunting in the northern valleys. Those remaining were outnumbered, and the settlers had rifles against Apache bows and aging muskets. As the war council gathered, Mary noticed movement in the settler party through the spyglass Taza had taken in a long-ago raid. Her breath caught. She knew that distinctive gray hat, that ramrod-straight posture in the saddle. Jacob Morrison, her father's former business partner from their failed California venture, a man who'd tried to claim her as his ward after her parents died, whose intentions had sent her running into the wilderness in the first place. I know their leader, she told Taza quietly. From before. His eyes sharpened. This helps us. Maybe. Her mind raced. He knows me, knows I'm white. If he sees me here. She trailed off, uncertain. The settlers stopped just outside rifle range, Morrison riding forward with 2 others under a white flag. His voice carried across the distance, speaking English with the authority of one used to being obeyed. We know you have white captives. Release them, and we'll leave peaceful. Keep them, and we'll take them by force. Mary felt the camp's eyes on her. Some of the newer members, those from bands recently joined with theirs, looked speculative. Would the Inda woman betray them? Would she run to her own kind? She thought of little Ayana, hidden with the other children, of Ipa, who'd become like a mother to her, of the life growing in her belly barely 3 months along, not yet showing, but already fiercely loved. Taza's child, Apache child. Let me go to them, she said. The protest was immediate and fierce, Taza's voice loudest among them. But Mary stood firm. Not to join them, to make them leave. They think I'm a captive. Let me show them otherwise. The argument was brief but heated. Finally. Taza gripped her shoulders, searching her face. You sure? I'm sure. Minutes later, she walked across the open ground between camp and settlers, feeling the weight of every gaze. She'd changed from her Apache dress to the one piece of white clothing she'd kept a simple gray dress, faded but recognizable as civilized attire. Her hair, usually worn in the Apache style, hung loose around her shoulders. The turquoise beads remained hidden beneath the high collar. Morrison's face went through several expressions as she approached: shock, relief, then calculation. Mary, thank God we heard rumors of a white woman among these savages. I've come to take you home. I am home, Mr. Morrison. His smile faltered. You're confused. Child, these heathens have twisted your mind, but we'll fix that. Come now, the men will cover your retreat. I'm not retreating. She kept her voice steady, aware of the rifles pointed at the camp behind her, of her family waiting. I'm here by choice, as are the other women you think are captives. Impossible. Morrison's face darkened. No Christian woman would choose to live among these animals. They've forced you, threatened you. They saved me. The words came out harder than intended. When my own kind left me to starve, when men like you saw me as property to be claimed rather than a person to be helped. She saw the moment he understood her meaning, remembered his own actions that had driven her away. His face flushed with anger and shame. You've gone native, he spat, forgotten God and decency, but you're still white, still under the protection of proper society whether you want it or not. Then let proper society protect me by leaving me where I choose to be. One of the other men spoke up. Jake, if she wants to stay with these heathens, let her. We came for captives, not volunteers for damnation. But Morrison's pride was pricked. She doesn't know what she's choosing. Look at her thin as a rail, probably beaten daily. Once we get her back to civilization, clean her up, she'll thank us. Mary laughed, surprising herself with the sound. Thin beaten. She pushed back her sleeves, showing arms corded with muscle from months of hard work. I've never been stronger, never been more valued. I speak their language, know their ways. I've taken a husband, will bear his children. I am Apache now, by choice and by right. Husband, Morrison's voice rose. You married one of these savages? I married a man who saw my worth when my own people saw only burden or opportunity. She met his gaze steadily. Go home, Mr. Morrison. Tell whatever story saves your pride. Say I was too far gone to save, too corrupted by heathen ways. Say I died in the wilderness if it suits you, but leave us in peace. I should drag you back in chains, he growled. Try, she said simply. Behind her, she heard movement in the camp, warriors taking position. But know this, I'll fight you, and when the story spreads of white men attacking a white woman who chose her own path, how will that serve your cause? How will that help you claim moral superiority? The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then one of Morrison's companions spoke again. Jake, she's right. We came looking for captives to rescue, not to force women from homes they've chosen. The town won't thank us for starting a war over one woman who wants to stay put. Morrison's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Finally, he spat to the side. You're dead to decent folk. You hear me, dead and damned. I've been dead to decent folk since they left me to starve. Mary replied. I found life among those you call savages. That's my choice to make. She turned her back on them, then the ultimate gesture of dismissal and trust in her Apache family to protect her if the settlers chose violence. Each step back to camp felt like crossing years, leaving behind the last ties to a world that had never wanted her anyway. Behind her, she heard horses turning. Morrison's voice raised in anger at his men, the sound of the settler party withdrawing. She didn't look back. Taza met her at the camp's edge, his face revealing nothing, but his hand briefly touched her shoulder, a rare public display of affection. The other warriors nodded approval, and the women surrounded her, touching her arms, her face. Speaking rapid Apache, she only partly caught but understood in spirit. She had chosen them over her birth people. The last test had been passed. That night, as the camp celebrated their bloodless victory, Mary sat with Ipa and the other women, her hands automatically working on the basket she was weaving. The older woman studied her with those knowing eyes. You burned a bridge today, Ipa said in Apache. No going back now. There was never any going back, Mary replied. That bridge burned the day my parents died. Today I just admitted it was ash. Ipa nodded slowly. Good. Now you can stop looking over your shoulder at roads you'll never walk. Look forward instead. What do you see? Mary touched her belly, still flat but holding promise. Children who'll know both worlds but be torn between neither, who'll be Apache because that's all they'll need to be. And when they ask about their white blood, when traders or soldiers remind them their mother was Inda, then I'll tell them blood matters less than choice, that their mother chose their father, chose their people, chose their way of life, and that they'll have the same right to choose who they are, not let others decide for them. Later, in their wiki-up, Taza spoke into the darkness. You could have gone, started fresh in their world, easier life. Easier isn't better, Mary said, finding his hand in the dark. And their world was never mine. This is... He was quiet for a long time. Then, the council meets tomorrow. Time to give you Apache name. You've earned it 3 times over. She smiled into the darkness, thinking of Morrison's parting words. Dead to decent folk? Well, let the decent folk have their towns and their churches and their closed doors. She had the sky and the mountains and a people who judged her by her actions, not her birth. What will they call me? That's for the council to decide, but I know what I call you in my heart. What? Nju, she who stands between worlds but belongs to ours. Outside, nightbirds called and the camp dogs barked at something in the darkness. Inside, Mary, soon to be Nju, rested her hand on her belly and felt the future stirring there. Apache and white and wholly its own, just as she had become. The council's decision came with the first snow. She would be called Nju, she who stands between worlds. The ceremony was simple, as Apache ways often were, but the weight of it settled into her bones like winter cold. The gathered elders spoke her new name, and with it, her old self fell away like a shed skin. Spring arrived with her belly round as a melon, her movements careful but still strong. Taza watched her with a mixture of pride and concern that would have amused her if she hadn't been so focused on the life turning inside her. Apache women worked until the moment of birth, and she was determined to do the same. You rest, he said one morning, finding her grinding corn despite her backache. Apache women don't rest, she replied, though she gratefully accepted when Ipa took over the grinding stone. Apache women also don't need to prove they're Apache, the older woman said pointedly. Sit. Let me tell you about birthing. The lessons were practical, sometimes frightening, always honest. Apache births were attended by women only. The men banished until the child's first cry announced success or silence spoke of loss. Ipa taught her the positions that eased labor, the herbs that helped with pain, the songs that welcomed new life. When her time came, it was during a thunderstorm that shook the mountains. The men left the wiki up, Taza's face carved from stone as he obeyed the ancient prohibition. Mary and Nju squatted between Ipa and Ayana, now old enough to assist at births, gripping their hands as her body did its ancient work. The pain was like nothing she'd known, waves that threatened to sweep her away. But between contractions, she thought of all the Apache women who'd done this before her, in wiki-ups and caves, while fleeing enemies or crossing deserts. If they could endure, so could she. The baby comes backward, Ipa said quietly to Ayana in Apache, thinking Nju too lost in pain to understand. But she heard, and fear clenched tighter than any contraction. Then turn it, she gasped in Apache, surprising them. My mother, she told me, her grandmother was midwife, showed her, through pain-blurred words. She explained what she remembered techniques from a world away, a lifetime ago. Ipa listened, nodded, her ancient hands gentle but firm as she worked. The storm raged outside, rain drumming the wiki up like war drums. Then, between one breath and the next, the baby turned. Nju felt the shift, the sudden rightness, and with a final push that seemed to split her in two, her son slid into the world. His cry was strong and immediate, cutting through the storm's noise. Ipa placed him on Nju's chest, wet and perfect and undeniably alive. He had his father's dark hair, but something around the eyes that spoke of his mixed heritage. A warrior, Ipa pronounced, strong like his mother, stubborn like his father. When tradition allowed, Taza entered, his usual composure cracked by emotion he didn't try to hide. He knelt beside them, one finger stroking the baby's cheek with impossible gentleness. Our son, Nju said in Apache, born between thunder and lightning. Goyal, Taza said, one who yawns, until he earns his warrior name. They laughed at the ordinary name for this extraordinary moment, their son who would carry both bloodlines into an uncertain future. The weeks that followed blurred together, learning to nurse with Ipa's guidance, carrying Goyal and the cradle board as she resumed her duties, watching Taza's fierce pride when he held his son. The camp celebrated the first Apache white child born to their band, seeing in him hope for survival in a changing world. But change came faster than expected. By Goyala's third month, soldiers had built a fort 2 valleys over. Settlers pushed into traditional hunting grounds. The band moved constantly, staying ahead of encroachment, but the net was tightening. "We need new strategies," Taza said one night, holding his son while Nju repaired his war shirt. "The old ways of fighting won't hold them back forever." "Then we learn new ways," she replied. "I can help. I know how they think, what they fear." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You would teach warriors to think like white men, to understand them, to fight them with more than arrows." The idea was radical, but desperate times called for adaptation. Nju began teaching English to those who would learn it. White military tactics she'd overheard in settlements. The psychology of settlers and soldiers. Some warriors resisted, but others saw wisdom in knowing their enemy. Her second pregnancy came as Goyala took his first wobbling steps. This time, she knew what to expect, faced the birth with less fear and more determination. Another son. This one with her auburn hair but his father's sturdy build. They named him Naichi, the one who leads. 2 sons in 2 years, and Nju felt the weight of their future. The world they would inherit would be neither fully Apache nor accepting of their white blood. She worked harder, teaching them both languages from their first words, both ways of seeing the world. The breaking point came when Goyal was 4, Naichi 2. A massacre 2 bands over soldiers had attacked a peaceful camp, killing women and children. The survivors fled to Taza's band with tales of horror and demands for revenge. "We ride," the warriors decided, "make them pay in blood." But Nju stood in council, her right as a proven woman of the band, and spoke against it. "You'll give them what they want, an excuse to kill more, a reason to call us savage." "We are savage," one young warrior spat, "and proud." "Then be savage with wisdom," she countered. "Hit their supply lines, not their families. Take their horses, their weapons, their ability to pursue. Make them fear shadows, not hate us for dead children." The argument was fierce, but Taza supported her, and his word carried weight. The modified raids where successful soldiers found themselves without ammunition, without mounts, without supplies, but with minimal bloodshed that couldn't justify massive retaliation. Through it all, Nju raised her sons with deliberate duality. They learned to track from Taza, to read from her. They could skin a rabbit and recite Shakespeare, shoot arrows and calculate sums. They were children of 2 worlds, prepared for whatever future awaited. Her third child came as a surprise, a daughter, born during the moon of green leaves. They called her Zilth na Odithli, light on the mountain, for the way sunlight caught the wicky-up smoke hole at her first cry. She had Nju's fair skin, but Taza's proud features, beautiful in the way that would bring her attention, wanted or not. "This one will need to be strongest of all," Ipa said, now ancient but still present for every birth. "Beauty in women is power and curse both." Nju understood. She'd seen how mixed-blood girls were viewed by both worlds, exotic curiosities at best, available prey at worst. Zilth na Odithli would learn to defend herself with more than beauty. The seasons turned. Children grew. The world shifted around them like sand. Nju bore 2 more sons, 4 boys, and 1 precious girl who would carry the traditions to the next generation. Each child was victory and heartbreak both, born into a world that had no place for them as they were. "Do you regret?" Taza asked one night, their children sleeping around them like puppies, the youngest at Nju's breast. "Regret what?" "The life you could have had, easier, safer." She looked around the wickiup at her dark-haired sons, her fierce daughter, her husband whose love had never wavered despite the hardships her presence sometimes brought. Outside, she could hear the camp settling for night, voices she knew as well as her own heartbeat. "I regret nothing," she said firmly, "except perhaps that our children must grow up fighting for their place in the world. But they'll be strong enough. We're making sure of that. The agent wants to count us again. Put us on rolls. Give us white names. Zhu sighed. They'd avoided the reservation system so far. But the walls were closing in. Soon they'd have to choose submit to the white world's rules or flee deeper into Mexico, away from both their homelands. Then we prepare them for that too. Names on paper mean nothing. What matters is who they know themselves to be. Taza pulled her close, careful of the nursing baby. Zhu, my white woman who became more Apache than those born to it. Your woman, she corrected. Just that, mother of your children, keeper of your home, defender of your people. The rest is just details. Outside, a coyote called, and one of the camp dogs answered. The eternal conversation between wild and tame, between what was and what had been forced to become. Zhu closed her eyes and listened, holding her family close, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in this moment, they were whole. The years had carved their passage into everything, the deepening lines around Taza's eyes, the silver threading through Nju's auburn hair, the way their eldest son Goyale now stood tall as his father, a warrior in his own right at 15 winters. The wickiup that had once seemed strange to her was now more home than any wooden house had ever been. Nju sat by the evening fire, her youngest a boy of 6 winters they called Tsai, Little Rock playing at her feet with wooden horses his grandfather had carved. Around her, the camp moved with the rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. Women preparing the evening meal, men returning from hunting, children's voices raised in some eternal game of chase and capture. Zilth na Odithli, now 12, helped her aunts with the cooking, her movements graceful and sure. She had grown beautiful as Ipa had predicted, but also strong, able to ride and shoot as well as any boy. Nju had made sure of that. Beauty without strength was vulnerability in any world. Shima, Nietzsche called, using the Apache word for mother. At 13, he was the quiet one, the thinker, already showing signs of the leader his name promised. Riders coming, father and Goyal return. She looked up, shading her eyes against the setting sun. The hunting party had been gone 5 days, longer than planned, but the riders moved without urgency, horses laden with game. A successful hunt then. Taza dismounted with the careful movements of a man whose body had seen 5 decades of hard living. But his eyes were still sharp, still warm when they found hers across the camp. Goyala followed, already beginning to carry himself with his father's quiet authority. The herds move north earlier each year, Taza said later, as they shared the evening meal. The land changes. The whites build more roads, more towns. The animals know? As do we, Nju replied. They'd had this conversation before, in different words but with the same meaning. The world they'd carved out for themselves was shrinking like a puddle in summer sun. That night, as the camp slept, she and Taza sat outside their wickiup, watching the stars wheel overhead. Their children slept within even Goyale, though he had his own shelter now, had joined his siblings, drawn by some instinct to be close to family. I've been thinking, Taza said into the comfortable silence, about the agency's offer. Nju's stomach tightened. The Indian agent had been pressuring them for months come to the reservation. Take up farming, send the children to the white school. Everything in her rebelled against it, but she heard the weight in her husband's voice. The young warriors talk of one last fight, he continued. A final stand against the whites. They would die as Apache, they say. Take many enemies with them. And you? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I am not afraid to die, but I look at our children and think, is my pride worth their lives? Can I ask them to die for a world that no longer exists? She took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars of a lifetime's battles. The world that exists is the one we make for them. On the reservation, they would try to kill the Apache in them, make them ashamed of who they are. And running fighting. How long before bullets find them? The whites are too many now. Like counting stars. They sat with the impossible choice between them. Stay free and die. Submit and live. But as shadows of themselves, she thought of her son's warriors born to a world that no longer needed warriors. Her daughter, who would be forced to choose between worlds that would each demand she deny half her heritage. What if, she said slowly, we take a third path? He looked at her, waiting. We go to the reservation, but we go as Apache. We take their names on paper, learn their ways, but keep our own in secret. We teach the children to walk in both worlds fully, not half in each. They survive by being more than either side expects. You would have us wear masks. I would have us adapt, as Apache have always done. When the mountain is too steep, we find another path. When the river is too wide, we build a bridge. This is just another obstacle to overcome. Taza considered this. The children would go to their schools and come home to our teaching. They would learn their letters and numbers, and also the names of stars and the ways of hunting. They would speak English in the day and Apache by the fire. They would be bridges themselves. It will be hard. Many will call us weak for bending. Let them. We'll be too busy surviving to care about their words. He squeezed her hand. You've grown wise, mind you. I've grown practical. There's a difference. They made the decision to go at summer's end, when the heat broke and travel would be easier. The camp divided, some choosing to follow Taza's leadership, others to continue the old ways in the mountains. There were no hard words at the parting. Each Apache had always been free to choose their path. The day they left, Nju stood at the edge of camp one last time, looking at the wickiups, the familiar paths, the mountains that had sheltered them. Somewhere among these stones and trees lay the bones of old Ipa, who had died 2 winters past, and the small grave of a son who had lived only 3 days, her 4th child, too weak for this hard world. Shima Dzilth Na Odi Thli stood beside her. So like Nju at that age, it made her chest tight. Are you sad to leave? No, Nju said, and found it was true. The place doesn't make the home. The people do. Where we go, we take ourselves, our ways, our memories. That's enough. The journey to the reservation took 8 days. As they crested the final ridge and saw the agency buildings spread below square wooden structures that looked wrong against the landscape, Nju felt her children tense around her. Remember, she said quietly, we bend so we don't break. We learn so we can teach. We survive so our grandchildren can choose freely what we cannot. Taza rode beside her, their youngest son before him in the saddle. His face showed nothing, but she knew him well enough to read the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself. This was death of a kind, but also birth, the end of one story and the beginning of another. As they descended toward their new life, Nju touched the turquoise beads at her throat, still there after all these years, hidden now beneath a high-collared dress that would satisfy the agent's ideas of propriety. She thought of the frightened girl she'd been, starving and alone, convinced she belonged nowhere. That girl was gone, but what she'd become was worth every hardship. Wife, mother, bridge between worlds. Her children would know struggles she couldn't imagine, but they would face them with the strength of 2 peoples in their blood, the wisdom of 2 ways of seeing in their hearts. The reservation sprawled before them, dusty and confined, but as they rode through the gates, Nju saw it not as a prison, but as another challenge to overcome. They had survived starvation, rejection, war, and change. They would survive this too. Look there, little Tsai said, pointing at a hawk circling overhead. It follows us. A good sign. Taza said, hawks adapt, hunt in desert or mountain, forest or plain. They survive by seeing far and striking true. Nju smiled. Even in this moment of change, he was teaching. They all were, always would be. That was how Apache ways would survive, not in grand gestures or final battles, but in quiet moments of instruction, in stories told by firelight, in children who knew themselves completely despite a world that would try to divide them. As they were assigned their plot of land, their new names carefully written in the agent's ledger, Taza became Thomas, and Ju became Mary again. Their children given English names that sat strange on Apache tongues, she felt not defeat, but determination. Names on paper were nothing. What mattered was what lived in the heart. That night, in their government-issued tent that would do until they built the required wooden house, the family gathered close, outside. They could hear other families settling in, the sound of Apache voices mixing with English commands, the whinnying of horses being corralled, dogs barking at unfamiliar scents. "We're still us," Nju said firmly. "Still Apache, still family. Everything else is just weather it passes over us but doesn't change what we are inside." "Inda Shinai Nili," Taza said quietly. "You were my white wife. Now you're my Apache wife who remembers being white. Our children are Apache who will remember both. This is our strength." She leaned against him, their children around them like a living blanket, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They had not been defeated. They had chosen to survive, to adapt, to endure, and in that choice lay victory of a different kind. The stars wheeled overhead, the same ones that had watched her stumble alone through the wilderness all those years ago. But now she wasn't alone. Now she had family, purpose, identity that no government ledger could erase. "Once you were alone," Taza murmured, echoing her thoughts. "Now we are together. Always, always," she agreed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The coyotes sang in the distance, wild voices calling to the tame dogs of the reservation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: school for the children, farming lessons for the men, domestic training for the women, all the ways the white world would try to reshape them. But tonight, they were simply themselves, Apache, family, whole. And that, Nju knew as sleep finally claimed her, would always be enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of the American frontier. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and thoughts on Mary's incredible journey from orphaned girl to Apache mother. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, survival, and courage in the Old West. Your comments and shares help us bring these forgotten voices of history to life. Until next time, partners.